It's an opportunity. And then within the course of the game, it's important to keep what people have invested time in, make sure that they feel rewarded for it. So one of the things with Spore is as you go along in the different levels, especially like creature level or some of the other ones, you keep building your guy up to a certain level and you start adding all these things that you've invested time in. And then when you move to the next level, the next stage, everything gets reset. So all the guys that you had befriended stop being your friends, and all the attributes you'd collected, most of them don't matter. And all the stuff that you'd actually built up goes away. And so every time you move to another stage, there's like this big demotivator. I'm back at the bottom again. All this stuff I invested that whole time that I played that level in has no feeling, no aspect in the game. You can make it sort of by saying, well, I'm going to try and keep these attributes about my character, but there's not really any attachment. You don't feel like an emotional attachment gets connected, rather it gets severed, and then you manually pick it back up if you want to. So again, look at what people care about in the game, try and keep that moving through the game. Another one that's I see over and over misused, use positive motivation in games. So obviously when God works with us, He uses both positive and negative motivation. We do the wrong thing, we get something bad. We do the right thing, we get something good. But even God is withholding a lot of that judgment right now. And in many ways, we kind of need to consider that too within a game. That how many games I've seen where you try and do something that doesn't match what the game designer wanted you to do, and so the game designer simply blocks you from doing that. Or worse yet, punishes you for doing that. That's not where I wanted you to go. That's not the kind of thing I wanted you to do. Case in point, this happens kind of like we talked about with the Spore and all the stages. As you play through the game, you're going to... What?
All the stages. That's awesome.
I started with one stage and then I realized, you know what? This really happens in all the stages. Some of them are more noticeable than others. But in the course of the game, you can actually, you build up across a given stage, you build up this little bar down here until you get to the far side. So the previous example, you can see the bar was about to here. Now it's all the way across. When it gets all the way across, you unlock a button which allows you to move up to the next stage. You get to go ahead to the next stage. Now, as we already talked about, when you click that button to go to the next stage, one of the bad things is you'll lose everything that you had before and things start over. But the other thing that's bad, as part of that, kind of adds on to that, is that your motivation to move on is really done through punishment, because partly you lose, everything you do doesn't really matter, and you can't really explore anymore, you can't really get more things. So earlier on in that stage, especially like give it the cell stage example, because it's a simpler one. When you're moving around, you're eating up creatures, and you're getting bigger and bigger, and you keep pick up more characteristics and kind of grow your creature bigger and bigger. Once you reach this point where you can now move on, instead, what happens is you can't pick up any more things. You can eat other creatures, but you don't get any bigger. You can't move up another level. You can't pick up any more attributes. You can't redesign your creature. You just can swim around in circles. Well, if you really like the cell game, if it was actually, for me it was a fun place to kind of just swim around and look at stuff. You want to be able to keep, I want to make my cell bigger. I want to do more stuff with my cell. No, it just stops. The game just says, boom, you're done. So one of the things, same thing with the tribal stage, so that's the example here. When you get to the, when you go from the creature stage to the tribal stage, you're going around and you're making friends with all these other little creatures around in their little tribal groups, or they're not quite tribal at that point, they're called, I forget what the term, nests or something. You remember what the term was for the creature groups?
They're like packs.
Packs or something. Anyway, so they've got their little homes, and you go around and you make friends with them. Or if you're a carnivore, you would eat them. But I was making friends with them. So you go around and you make friends with all these little groups. And then you get to a point where now you can advance to the next stage. Well, you can continue to go around and make friends with groups, but it doesn't really add anything more to your abilities. You can't really grow yourself anymore. You can't do anything. And when you hit the next button, suddenly you go to the next stage. Everybody's in the tribal stage now around you. And you lose all your characteristics from before. Well, I was like, man, that's just not really fun. It would be fun to keep going exploring, be able to do something and have motivation. I think Jedediah said, well, what they should have done is just made all the rest of the group start advancing to the tribal stage around you. And once they advance to the tribal stage, you're like too primitive to talk with them, so they just start ignoring you. And then you'd be motivated to want to move to the next level. It's like, oh, I can keep going exploring if I want to, and I could actually build up my character and do stuff. But all my friends are moving on ahead of me, and I want to move, so I'm motivated to want to move. as opposed to feeling like I'm punished. I just went in here and now I'm blocked from doing anything interesting, and I would like to keep playing some more of this level, and it was kind of fun, but now I can't because I got too far along my progress bar, and now the level's basically dead to me. And so it just really kind of a negative feeling that ends up. So seek the opportunity to motivate your players to move forward in the game by putting in positive feedback. Not positive feedback, that's being something else, but it sounds right.
Positive reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement, positive motivation. Make them wanted to, make them excited to move on. And if it turns out that you're finding, in your game, like we talked about, that people are actually happier doing something else and they don't want to move on, let them do that. Figure out ways to let them kind of enjoy that. If people are enjoying doing something else in the game, let them enjoy it. And if you have to, give them rewards to move on, but let them continue to do what they're wanting. Don't just slap them around because you wanted them as a game designer. I've decided you need to move on. And so, here's another principle of game design, and I guess any kind of design in general. People remember extremes. If you give a whole series of experiences to people in a game, and this has been proven statistically, and then you have people sit down and talk about what they remember from the game, they will remember the extreme bads and the extreme goods. What tends to happen is anything that's in that middle ground gets forgotten pretty quickly. People's memories of an experience in the game tend to fade in the area where it's kind of in the gray space, and they remember the extremely good and the extremely bad experience. So as a fundamental principle of game design, you generally want to have people have really good experiences and then have bad experiences that are fairly mellow. And if you want to keep the game challenging, a lot of times you still have to balance that. You can't just say, okay, well, you just have good experience, good experience, good experience, because then the good experiences become kind of discounted at that point, and the challenge of the game doesn't feel like it's there. But what you can do if you have to balance good against bad is you make just a few really good experiences, and then you make the bad experiences fairly light. So maybe dying isn't a really bad experience, or if you're playing even something like a first-person shooter and you're dealing with a multiplayer experience, I don't know if you guys have noticed that with some of the games what will happen is if you get shot, you just will see yourself lay down. Okay, it was not too bad of an experience, and then I get to start back up somewhere else. For the guy who shot me, he gets to see me go blow into pieces or whatever, and he gets the good experience, while I only get the mildly bad experience. Maybe not the best example to use as group of people, but still the idea that we can take a bad experience and try and figure out how to balance it out, and then try and give people good experiences that are really, really exciting. Like taking down the big creature, or fighting the big thing, or accomplishing something they couldn't, or getting to a point where I can suddenly make a whole bunch of forward progress and it feels really good and I did what I didn't expect. And then maybe I take a few losses here and there, and then I take a really big, I did it again, and make it up next stage. We need to look for the ways to try and make sure that the extremes that people remember are the extremely good things. It's really bad when you have a game that has all these little good progresses, and then you have something really bad happen, so you get rolled way back, and then you make a little good. And even if you're making it ahead every time, you take 5 steps forward, and then roll back 3 all at once, and then take 5 little steps forward, and then roll 3 back at once. You're still moving ahead by 2, but people are going to remember the big fallbacks. You want to flip that around. You take the little fallbacks, and then you take the big steps ahead. And kind of apply that all sorts of places in games. Spore had some good and bad examples, amazingly enough, of this. So the certain, like we talked about, the rollbacks are good. Unfortunately, when they had the forward ones, what they ended up having happen is basically in like the civilization level, once you get to a certain level of momentum, you keep losing and losing, but you keep acquiring resources because you can't lose your first one. And then also you get enough and you just kind of, and you get everything. But unfortunately, it also loses sort of the emotional experience because it's so diminished because it's just such an overwhelming, I finally won, so now it's just railroad through everything. So I think it's important that you keep track of that and make the experiences actually feel realistic, not simply, okay, I got to a certain level and suddenly I win the whole game and it's over. You got to feel like, okay, it's still a challenge, but I'm making really exciting, emotionally enjoyable successes.